What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. The developer AMA was delayed a bit yesterday, but I believe we have all the responses now. In today's video, we're going to summarize the responses, organizing them a bit and trying to take out a lot of the filler and fluff. The devs get asked, how has Mercy been performing after her changes? Josh Knows says Mercy has stayed about the same as before. The changes were mostly neutral in terms of power. Her win rate is still around 51 to 52%. There was a small drop in pick rate from 9 to 8%. Her damage taken stats increased by like 4 or 5%, but her average death stayed the same. Likely we can attribute this to the new passive at work, which is she can heal herself now when healing a teammate, and taking more damage due to the longer Guardian Angel cooldown. He goes on, we don't have further changes planned for Mercy at the moment. We feel it would be good to let this one settle and see how players adjust to the changes, since it can take some time, and then evaluate if more adjustments are necessary. The meta is also quite different between the two patches, so it's even more surprising that Mercy wasn't really impacted overall. Despite the stats not changing much, there have been both positive and negative effects on the player experience. There has been positive sentiment around players feeling like they can fairly try to counter Mercy in ways that were difficult with her extreme mobility before, as well as Mercy players having more agency in their ability to save low health allies. However, at the same time, the reduction in mobility is going to feel bad for Mercy players needing to adjust at the new timing. The devs get asked about their philosophy to reworking abilities in general, and Alec Dawson uses Mercy as an example. He says, when looking at adding to a hero or reworking them, we first ask, can we achieve our desired gameplay changes in their current kit and abilities? The Guardian Angel meter for Mercy in Overwatch 2 is a good example of adding something new within her present abilities. If we can't solve for desired gameplay within what we have, we'll ask if there is room on the hero for something brand new. We are currently asking those questions for Sombra and Roadhog. If we end up doing new abilities for either of them, it'll take some time, and I expect small holdover changes like the ones in our Season 3 patch. Guys, comments like this are important when we start to analyze future things they say and different clues they give, because this is how we can apply their philosophy to changes overall. It seems to make sense that the current Roadhog changes that kind of reworked the damage scaling of his kit make sense in this philosophy, as they're ultimately trying to give him different utility. But as we already know, when different abilities or new things need visual effects or other development, they try to make do with the hotfix items they can just tweak with simple numbers, or I'm sure come up with a solution, because they might not always have the idea necessarily. More Mercy related subject matter, they get asked, what's your opinion on Pharmacy, or the Pharah Mercy combo? Is there any intention to make Pharah more viable without a pocket and less annoying with a pocket? Josh No replies in saying, this is an interesting one since I often play Pharah even without Mercy, so I'm probably biased there. Pharah is a hero that is tough to find buffs for, and she performs better on the stat side than most, so it always becomes a question of if she even needs changes. She is quite situational as a pick, but very capable of taking over the game in the right circumstances, and is sort of a harder skill check for the enemy team than most heroes in terms of trying to counter her. I wouldn't put all of that on the Mercy combo, but it is very powerful. We've considered potentially reworking Pharah to make her more interactive, but it would be a dicey one, since to make big changes there, it would likely mean she has to lose the airtime she is capable of. Her design started as the rocket launcher hero, but her identity quickly shifted to the always flying hero. Losing that would likely alienate a large portion of her fans. To this point, you may not remember, and many of you may not even have played Overwatch at launch by this point, but originally Pharah wasn't capable of easily staying in the air forever. Similar to Sombra staying permanently in Viz, Pharah flying was a more limited thing back in the day. Even if you managed your resources perfectly, I believe you would still eventually fall, whereas they reworked the way the jets work to make it possible with perfect management to stay in the air indefinitely. What Josh Knows is explaining is they might go back on that if they're ever trying to make her more self-sufficient or have different edges, because that's the main edge that stands out. The devs get asked about Cassidy's magnetic grenade, which is kind of a cheap mechanic, and many argue is worse than the flashbang stun effect Overwatch 1 had. Alec Dawson responds in saying, "This is something we are actively working on and have tinkered with iterations internally. The overall goal here is to bring back some of the lost synergy in Cassidy's kit. Example, Fan the Hammer losing some of its ease of use. Magnetic Grenade is rather flat in what it does, and while some abilities can be in this space, Cassidy's kit already has a lot of simplicity, making Magnetic Grenade a prime candidate for adjustments. We won't be in full stun mode like Flashbang, but are looking at ways to push Magnetic Grenade into an ability that either enables Cassidy to line up more shots or provide new utility." It's interesting they say this because that was the rationale on the slow effect on Sojourn's nade, which doesn't even exist anymore, by the way. The AoE slow was intended to help you line up shots, so I'm curious where they're leaning towards with this. In the end, now that the sniper reign of terror has weakened a bit, Cassidy has really risen in power, and in fact, I think has one of the better ultimates for the DPS category now that it has that fortified effect. And with only one tank for the enemy to interact with, in a lot of matchups, he gets guaranteed value with Deadeye. Magnade has a lot of power, though I admit is a bit simple and kind of silly the way it tracks you around corners and stuff, as if Stun Fan the Hammer wasn't corny enough. They got another version of similar amounts of easy damage. The devs get asked about Junkrat, who has been described as being a pain at all levels of play by at least this Redditor. Alec Dawson responds in saying, "Junkrat has moved quite a bit since his latest nerf 2 weeks ago, down 3 or 4% at both the highest ranks and the metal ranks. We understand there are further pain points in his kit though. One change we'd like to make, but it will take some additional tech, is Junkrat's nades having a smaller hitbox after bouncing off a wall. We believe that type of change would alleviate a lot of the pain points when facing Junkrat and still keep his gameplay rewarding. No timeline as it involves multiple teams." As a Junkrat player, I'm pretty happy with where his balance is because he is still quite useful in his good setups, just not as corny and free, but he's definitely got some good matchups in the game, considering there's a lot of really tanky picks that are quite good, and Junk has a lot of answers for, even if he doesn't quite have the same 1-2 punch as he did in the previous patch, now that his concussion mine often does not combo to kill. The devs get asked how they feel about the sniper characters in the game right now. Josh No says, "I was looking at Widowmaker stats just last week, mainly for map balance discussions. But it was interesting to see with the current map pool, there were 4 to 5 maps where Widowmaker was really effective, 4 to 5 maps where she is quite bad or rarely picked, presumably because she's not good there, and the rest that she was playable but not particularly great. For anyone wondering, her worst maps were 2 of the push maps and 3 control maps. Her best maps were 3 payload and 2 hybrid maps." Josh No continues in saying, "Snipers feel quite counterable to me at the moment, but it's certainly something we keep a close eye on to make sure they don't get out of hand. I think the instances where snipers feel oppressive to play against are really memorable, and it's typical of human nature to remember the bad more than the good. At least for me, it's rare that I remember when the enemy Widowmaker was ineffective and swapped off versus when she was dominating." Speak for yourself, Josh No. That's a point of pride for myself and I'm sure many other players. Couple comments about matchmaking now. What are you doing about match leavers? They're constantly ruining metal rank games. Can we have a harsher punishment? Gavin Winter says, "We can agree we can do more to disincentivize leaving games, especially at the end of competitive seasons. We're considering making ranked penalties partially carry over from season to season, and we'd like to make sure that leaving games is never optimal for progressing challenges regardless of whether you're in ranked or unranked." Wait, is that actually the case? Or is that just like a general rule that they've already applied? Because I hope so. Here's an interesting one. The devs get asked about blowouts in Overwatch 2, and everyone blames it on poor matchmaking, but is it a byproduct of faster and more punishing gameplay in Overwatch 2? Are you looking at ways to make matches feel more fair outside of adjusting the matchmaking? Gavin Winter says it's certainly a complex issue, but we do suspect that some aspects of Overwatch 2 can lead to the game feeling more one-sided than Overwatch 1 did in some cases. We've been looking at all sorts of issues that might affect how one-sided our games feel. We know that levers cause matchmaking to feel bad in quick play because our priority is to get a player into the match as quickly as possible, and it doesn't always mean the player that has backfilled is as good of a fit for that match as the one that left. We think we can improve our process here in the future. And what he means there is you might not be in the right MMR range, plus or minus. Like they might just try to backfill you quickly. And I've had this happen when I play unranked, or quick play as I still call it. The enemy team will have been dominating my team. Then I backfill in and it turns out I am much higher rated than the player I'm replacing. And then we steamroll back, which always kind of feels good, but is kind of breaking the matchmaking because they were prioritizing filling the vacancy over matchmaking it fairly. Gavin Winter goes on and saying, addressing more punishing gameplay specifically, we know that getting back spawned or spawn killed if your spawn room just shut down due to objective capture are bigger swings since we have fewer heroes in a match. We're working on a solution for these issues for Season 4. We know that there isn't a silver bullet for solving the issue of one-sided matches, but we're attacking the problem from several angles simultaneously. So what he's saying here is that in Season 4, there might be like a spawn protection type mechanic or a new way to move your spawn. So for example, let's say the enemy is about to cap. You on the defensive side are getting the original spawn. The famous one here, and I believe Aaron Keller, in fact, explained they're looking at this specific one, is Gibraltar A. The spawn point for the A checkpoint is in the shuttle phase. But once they capture the shuttle, some of you might have had that closer spawn and only a couple of you are there. Meanwhile, the enemy attacking team is all on the cart. They just won the team fight. And then those 5 can fight your 2 or 3. And then it's even harder to regain control of the shuttle just because you spawned in an inopportune moment. I would take a guess that maybe having the option to take a worse position spawn, technically, like further away from the objective, but one that's closer to the rest of your team, would kind of solve this. Or if there was smarter mechanics to know when that's about to happen, I'd expect a blog post about this subject coming up. But those are my guesses so far. Furthermore, a more advanced discussion about the game will be about the blowouts issue in Overwatch 2. Since he responded to this question, it almost seems like they're agreeing that there's something in the game design that's causing this to happen, because he doesn't just say, no, we entirely think it's the matchmaker's fault. From my perspective, I think the first major step forward they did was empowering the support role, because while tank players may not like how strong of an influence supports have now, as a support player myself, I now feel that when my tank doesn't have the optimal pick, I at least have more options that are viable that can support him, as opposed to previous metas where only a few tanks were very dominant. Not having that tank meant I would be most optimal on a less viable support because it syncs with the comp, but the whole strat is just weaker, so it's kind of a waste of time. Whereas now, all the supports are really good, and even if you're in a losing tank matchup, you at least can go get your value where you're supposed to try to help them out as much as you can. That makes the gameplay a lot better, in my opinion. So at least in that respect, I feel like the one-sided matches aren't as bad since the recent balance patch. I'd also say that the player base's knowledge of the interactions of the game, or at least having the skill set to counteract them, also is the reason for that. For example, if you're struggling against Pharah as a support player and you think it's your DPS's job to counter her, meanwhile, the support characters are some of the best range damage dealers in the game, you're kind of missing the point. You know, there's a lot of matchups like that where in reality, Ana has some of the most effective range damage in the entire game for shooting at Pharah. Yet if you play her like a heal bot and expect your Cassidy to shoot her at long range, well, she's never going to die. That's just the way that works. And if you just don't know that, or you don't take the initiative to do your actual job, which is shoot at the Pharah to zone her out, as opposed to try to heal bot her damage, which outranges most of the hit scans, well, you're going to be left wondering why you're losing that matchup. Similar to not taking the high ground up against dive tanks and letting them go up and down against you. A lot of things like that, where if you just position in the wrong place or target the wrong thing, you're going to get destroyed. But Overwatch has always been like that. I think it's harsher in Overwatch 2 because there's less guardrails. At least in Overwatch 1, you can hide behind 2 tanks at least a little bit and get some ults. Whereas it's possible in Overwatch 2 for them to just take control of the map constantly and you never have a chance if you always make the same mistake over and over again. But that's how competitive games work, in my opinion. The devs get asked about the experimental card. Is it gone forever? And what's the most insane change to a hero you've tried out internally? Josh No replies in saying the experimental card was much more useful in the past when the patches were further apart, months versus weeks. The turnaround time to have it patched and reacted to between balance releases means it isn't really feasible as a testing for upcoming live patches sort of thing. Though hopefully we'll try to find some fun uses for it again in the future outside of just patch previews. The most polarizing change are usually during the hero prototype or rework phase rather than anything for live balance. There have been a lot. The ones that immediately come to mind are Sombra hack reducing max health for a minute, Wrecking Ball knocking down enemies he rolls over, and D.Va having an ability to tether and drag enemies with her mech. Launching them tethered to her ult was hilarious and mean. Okay, those are some ridiculous changes. And to be honest, those wacky things I felt was best for the experimental card, because even back when they supposedly were testing the upcoming patch on the experimental card, it didn't really ever feel, or we didn't know exactly if they were taking our feedback or not. So it was sort of like, why are you even giving this to us if it's not going to be official anyway? You're sending it to a separate thing just so that we get the same thing eventually in a couple of weeks. It was kind of weird and wonky. I don't like that so much, but what I do like is them trying brand new mechanics or letting content creators or community members suggest new mechanics. My favorite one that they didn't end up keeping was Lucio's drop the beat being able to one-hit kill an enemy if you landed on their head. I have no idea why that still isn't in the game. It's definitely balanced and good, especially with Lucio being a little bit of a weaker pick. Let's give him something crazy, huh? But D.Va remech being able to one-hit kill, or Reinhardt dealing a big burst of damage at close range with his hammer on Earthshatter, things like that they toss into the experimental, or the long list of really wacky ones he's listing here, like D.Va being able to tether an enemy to the mech as she launches it, and then it, blows up in the sky with them attached? All right, that is hilarious. That kind of thing, it'd just be funny to see, you know? Wrecking Ball knocking down enemies when he rolls them over. I mean, that's like having an Earthshatter on cooldown. Some of these ideas sound terrible, but once in a while, they go through to the experimental and they decide to keep it. For example, D.Va being able to insta-kill on remech was originally looked at as widely overpowered and just silly. I think it's kind of awesome. I did at the time, and I feel like no one really complains about it today because we know it's supposed to happen. And so it's something you just learn and either outplay or get wrecked by. That's Overwatch, isn't it? All right, guys, I believe that's everything from the AMA. If we find more things, we will make a subsequent video on the subject. If you enjoyed this one, please be sure to leave the video with a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come live. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.